Okay, so hello everyone, and welcome to Beyond the Degree webinar series. We'll be starting with the land acknowledgement. I acknowledge that Western University is located in the traditional territories of Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape, and Chunangton nations, on lands connected with the London Township and Sombra Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. These lands continues to be home of diverse indigenous peoples, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors of our society. The Beyond the Degree alumni webinar series are designed to give you the opportunity to connect with alumni from the basic medical sciences departments and as they share their unique career journeys and practical advice from their professional experiences. We'll be running this webinar series this fall and winter semester, so if you would like to receive further information of future webinars, please visit our website, which I'll put in the chat shortly. We're so glad you could join us today and encourage you to participate and think about how the insight shares might apply to your own career and pathway. Today's session will be with a presentation from our alumni speaker, Sarah Chadwick, followed by a live Q&A where you'll have the chance to ask your own questions and learn directly from her experiences. Sarah, again, thank you for being here today. And please feel free to start. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen. All right. Are you guys seeing my actual screen or presenter view right now?
No, I'm seeing the presenter view. Yeah,
okay. Never mind. No worries. Okay. So feel free to stop me at any time with questions if you'd like, but thank you all for having me today. I am excited to kind of talk to you guys about this. I was mentioning to Maria before this started that I actually attended a lot of these seminars too before I left grad school. So hopefully I can help, maybe. But yeah, my name is Sarah Chadwick. I got my PhD at Western in Schulich in anatomy and cell bio, and I'm currently an advanced imaging specialist with Nikon based in Toronto. So the kind of my path so far, I actually did a Bachelor of Medical Sciences with an honor specialization in clinical biochemistry at Western as well, from 2011 to 2015. I then initially started as a master's and transitioned over to a PhD in anatomy and cell bio. Between 2015 and 2020, I was in Patrick Lajoie's lab, if you know him. From there, I was sort of still on the fence in terms of whether I wanted to go the academia or industry route. At that point, I moved on to a postdoc at SickKids, where I changed my specialty completely. I went from yeast genetics in my PhD to innate immunity and cell biology in my postdoc. And I did that for 3 years, 2020 to 2023, at which point I started my current role, which is that advanced imaging specialist at Nikon. So what is an advanced imaging specialist? So an AIS is part of the instruments division at Nikon. So if you thought Nikon mostly just made cameras, you would not be alone. I thought the same thing. But they do basically everything involving glass. So microscopes are a big part of Nikon. And the instruments division in particular is more than 70% PhD holders. So it's a lot of scientists in there. So in my role, I work with both the Nikon kind of sales team side of things, as well as scientists in Toronto. And the kind of summary is that I work to try and match the research and experiments or applications that people have in their labs to the right microscope. So whether they want to prioritize things like speed or uncommon fluorophores, or they need something that's really, really going to be gentle on cells, or there's tons of different applications. So my job is to both know the science and the practical considerations of being a scientist, as well as be the expert on the microscopes. So the ins and outs of how they work, their pros and cons, different types of confocal microscopy, that kind of thing. So my job involves a lot of teaching, training, supporting people. So I'll teach people about why one method might be better for their research than another, or might give them the results they want, as well as train them to use the big fancy microscopes that we install in their labs. And then support after the fact with experiments and with kind of the practical parts of imaging. If their images don't look as good as they want, trying to figure out why, that kind of thing. In some cases, I also help with experimental design. So if things aren't looking the way they want them to, I can consult on the fluorophores they're using, primary and secondary antibodies that might work better. If they're getting a lot of background, using live versus fixed samples, considerations for that kind of thing. So I use a lot of kind of the practical science skills that I got from PhD and postdoc in my current job. I also get to build things like analysis and imaging routines. So a lot of the data analysis skills that you guys are probably learning that I had to learn are kind of carried over. I also get to do some programming to do automated imaging. So to have it maybe load a plate onto the stage and switch objectives, or do an overview and then switch to high mag and then image more. Or have it maybe, if something's going to divide, maybe do an overview of the whole plate and then zoom in and start imaging only when the cell divides. So it's kind of a broad job with a lot of different responsibilities, but that makes it fun for me. I also get to occasionally build or install microscopes, which is fun if you're someone like me. I was a big fan of Lego. I took apart a lot of stuff as a kid, so this is fun for me. It's not super frequent, maybe once or twice a year, but I really enjoy it. In terms of what it's actually like working at Nikon or in this job, it's a hybrid job. So I work from home a few days a week, but it varies. So there'll be some weeks where I'm mostly at home. There's other weeks where I'm mostly downtown. It's kind of wherever I need to be. It's got pretty flexible hours. Most scientists tend to start later. So I'd say 9 to 5, but it's more like 10 to 5, maybe. But again, it varies. AIS roles, and we're all partnered with a salesperson. So all of those roles are territory based at Nikon. So the experiences others may have would vary, but for me, my territory is just south of DuPont in Toronto. So it's like a teeny tiny geographic area. And I visit a lot of different labs and hospitals, universities, all that kind of stuff. So it's easy for me to kind of get around, but others in my role in other parts of the country may cover 2 or 3 provinces. So they may be doing a lot more flying or driving, whereas I'm just kind of taking the subway to work every day. As I mentioned before, the instruments division is like 70% PhD holders. So I'm managed by a scientist. I work with scientists. The sales rep I work with has a PhD in neuroscience from U of T. So it's very science heavy, and it's still a business. It's still industry, but I would say it's not as corporate as I expected. There's still a lot of emphasis on doing good science, and making sure that we're prioritizing people's research. My role involves a good bit of travel. Especially the first year, I was away probably every other week for a bit. So mostly I was being flown down to New York, where they have the Nikon headquarters for North America. And I was kind of being trained on basics of optics, but also eventually the real nitty gritty of how specific instruments work so that I can be the specialist on these things. So taking apart point scanning confocals and looking at the guts and trying to learn what signs are there that something has gone wrong, or trying to learn how they work so that I can answer questions on it and help if something goes wrong. I'm learning constantly and encouraged to do so. So not just through training and that kind of stuff, but also I'm learning constantly on the job. So as part of the travel thing, actually, they send everyone in our roles to do some form of mentoring. So I was shadowing with 2 other people in my role, and I was all through Cincinnati and Louisville and St. Louis, Missouri, and a few other places, learning not just the technical skills, but also the kind of soft skills involved in doing this job. I'm also encouraged to learn more technical stuff whenever I want. And we've got a lot of really, really awesome microscopists on our team that are always happy to teach. And it's been pretty fun learning a lot, especially given that grad school, you tend to get a very narrow focus on what you're learning. But with all the labs I visit, I'm getting to kind of learn a bit about, maybe in the morning, I'm meeting with someone who is 3D printing scaffolds to grow organoids. And then in the afternoon, maybe I'm meeting with someone who's using or looking at bacterial biofilm growth, and then someone who's looking at centrioles in cancer cell division. It's really all over the place, and that's pretty fun. I would also say this job is, contrary to what I expected, it really is a team. I don't know if that's true of other versions of this job at other kind of imaging-based companies, but there's a lot of camaraderie. There's a lot of help. We have a group chat where people in my role all over the country, all over the continent, we're all kind of sharing knowledge, helping each other out. If I've got someone who wants to see how a specific fancy microscope works with their samples, I can send those samples off to my friend in BC who will image them for me and send them back. And it's a lot of back and forth like that. So it's a pretty good work environment, I would say. As I mentioned, I attended a lot of these seminars before I went into industry, but what I found that a lot of them didn't include were the specifics of how they actually got the job. So I learned about a lot of careers, but not so much the practical part. So I figured I'd give you guys a rundown on how it happened. So in my postdoc, I was working at SickKids, where they have a really cool imaging facility, and Nikon was running a point scanning confocal demo. So I attended it. I did not need to attend it. I just thought it looked like fun. And I was very nerdy about it because I've always been interested in microscopes. So at the time, I also kind of ended up making friends with the Nikon reps that were there. And I was thinking about leaving academia at the time. So I started asking about their jobs and how they liked them and if they had any advice for me. And at that point, they told me there actually was an opening in Toronto. So the sales rep who I now work with referred me for the role, and separately a recruiter actually reached out to me about it on LinkedIn too, but I was already kind of in the process. And then I had a bunch of interviews. So the first was with HR and my two potential managers and the sales rep that I work with. The second was two technical specialists who asked me a lot of questions about my microscopy background, my science background, what different techniques I'd used, and kind of quizzed me on the technical stuff. That went well. So they flew me down to New York to meet the executives, where I had several kind of rapid fire interviews on very little sleep. I was very jet lagged, but still went well. That point I flew home, and the next day I got the offer. I negotiated it. You should always negotiate your offer. And then I accepted it and kind of transitioned right from my postdoc into this job. So in terms of what worked for me when I was applying for jobs or trying to transition from academia to industry, first was a resume overhaul and having kind of pre-made resume templates for different types of jobs that I was applying for. So don't use your CV. The CV is very, very different. You want to have your resume as short as possible. If you can get it down to one page, that's even better. For me, that involved taking out all of my papers, which hurt after I'd worked so hard for them. I still included an ORCID link in case anyone wanted to read my papers, but most recruiters are not really looking for that. They're kind of more interested in practical research skills. So having like a little headline at the top talking about what the gist of your work is or what your skills are is helpful. Taking off the dates on when you graduated, stuff like that, so no one knows what age you are, kind of can get your foot in the door if you're brand new to work. And focusing on kind of concrete things that you achieved. So it was a big difference from my CV. I kind of had to start from scratch, but I got a lot more interviews once I started doing that. Second, or honestly, it should be first, was networking. Not necessarily in the way I thought, though. I kind of saw networking as going to a networking specific event and wearing a blazer and talking to a bunch of people and trying to kind of get something out of it. And it felt very fake and not so much me. But it turns out networking in the real world is just kind of making friends. So showing up to things that you're actually interested in, or going to conferences and just being yourself, being authentic, making a friend who you didn't know before you got there. Having done that, you then kind of have access to a friend of a friend who might have a job that you're interested in. So most people I know who got into jobs that they really like in industry did it because they knew someone. And even in my case, having spoken to the Nikon reps was what got me the interview, most of it at least. Third was kind of intentionally expanding my skill set in my postdoc. So I think I mentioned before, I was still kind of on the fence about being in academia or industry at that time. So when I did the postdoc, because I wasn't really ready to leave science yet, I knew I still wanted to do research. I figured I wanted to make it more applicable to both industry and academia. So for me, that meant looking at job posting for things I might be interested in and trying to kind of look at the gaps between what I knew or what I was able to do and what I needed to be able to do. So my PhD was a lot of yeast genetics, a lot of like biochem, a lot of Western blots. But I was kind of missing some mammalian culture skills. I was missing some clinical applications. I could probably use some more teaching experience. So I used the postdoc to kind of get those skills in line so that I had more options when I decided which way I was going to go. And finally, interview prep and doing research in advance. So I'm sure all of you are good at doing research, but interviews can be intimidating and they can kind of make you act not like yourself, and doing enough prep in advance kind of helps make it better. So I would say research not just the company, but also research your interviewer, research people who are currently working at the company, look at what they do, what their skills are. Because most of the time, the questions that you're going to get are going to be based off their experience, not yours. This is true for defense, by the way. I did the same thing for my PhD defense. It's a great choice. Read your committee members' papers. But also doing research on kind of standard interview questions was helpful. HR people are mostly pulling them from lists that they find online. So you'll see a lot of mentions in interview prep guides on STAR questions or something like that, where you have to list, tell stories about like a situation, what the task was that you had to perform, the action you took, and the result. Those are actually perfect. That's most of what my interview questions ended up being for a bunch of different companies. So highly recommend doing that. And also having like a 20 to 30 second blurb about who you are, what you do, what you're interested in, because there's nothing like having a high pressure situation where someone says, tell me about yourself, to make you immediately forget everything you've ever done. So doing the prep helps kind of take the stress off and help you kind of shine, for lack of a better word. Okay, so now that I'm actually in industry, I can kind of give you guys a bit of the inside scoop, at least from my perspective. So everyone's experience is different, but this is just for me. So some of the pros of transitioning to industry, first was that there are set hours, there's set vacation and sick leave and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know what your experience has been like, but I found it was kind of, there's a lot of guilt. There was a lot of kind of weirdness about taking vacation or being out sick or things like that, even though there shouldn't be when you're a grad student, mostly because the rules aren't super clear. You can kind of end up working crazy hours or not taking vacation for the sake of getting your research done. Whereas in industry, there's an HR team, there are laws they have to follow, all that kind of stuff that really takes the pressure off. So you can really take your time off. Along the same lines, I found that in industry, when you're done for the day, you're done for the day. So in grad school and my postdoc, I found that I'd finish my experiment, something wouldn't work, and I would go home and I'd keep thinking about it. I'd try to think about how to fix it, or I'd be worried about it. In industry, that doesn't really happen for me as much. So I really do care about the people I work with, and I really want their research to work, but it's not as personal, I guess. It's not all on me if it doesn't. So I'm able to kind of disconnect a lot easier, which is nice. You kind of end up developing broader interests, whether you like it or not. Like I said before, you end up very, very specialized in grad school, which is great. And that's the kind of the point of a PhD or a master's and defending that. But it's nice learning stuff that's so far outside your field that even the speaker series isn't going to invite that person in to talk. It's pretty fun. Kind of have to mention income. It's definitely easier to get higher income jobs in industry. The jump is pretty significant going from a postdoc to industry. And then it's a little bit easier to negotiate, I find. You can still negotiate in academia, you should. But it's more expected in industry, so it doesn't feel as weird. But yeah, the income can be great in academia, but I think those spots are kind of fewer and farther between. And for kind of all of the above reasons, it's definitely lower stress for me, at least. I find that I have more energy at the end of the day to do stuff I actually want to, because I'm not as stressed about my research and where it's going, because again, it's not quite as personal in industry. So cons, honestly, leaving academia was tough. This is something I've spoken to other people who've done it as well, and we all kind of agree that it feels very weird to go from a certain type of culture that you are used to in academia, the type of people that you're around, where it's very research focused, and experiment focused, and then leaving that and changing everything can be hard. So my advice is to make friends who are doing it, or talk to people who are doing it, so you don't feel so alone. And along the same lines, there's a big learning curve, I found. So at the end of grad school, you're probably going to be really, really good at certain experiments, or at maybe training students or teaching if you're a TA. So you are an expert in the field by the time you graduate. You will not be if you suddenly, transition to a new job with a brand new skill set. So you kind of need to be okay with not being the expert right away. You'll get there eventually. You'll learn it all again. You're all very smart people, but it can be a little bit tough. There's also a lot more focus on business and making money than there is on doing research for the sake of doing research, or trying to improve things for mankind or cure a disease. And it's just different priorities, which can be kind of tough to get used to. And I will say that I would much rather do a Western blot than attend a meeting. I don't love meetings, and there's a lot of them in pretty much every industry field. So I don't have to do as many as others do, but it's a thing to consider, and I do miss doing bench work sometimes. There are industry roles, obviously, where you keep doing bench work, but it is something to consider when you're looking for an industry job, whether you want to stay at the bench or not. So overall, some kind of like lessons that I'd heard or I'd gotten from leaving academia that weren't what I expected, or kind of were in contrast to what I'd been told leaving academia was going to be like. First, a PhD or a master's is valuable in or out of academia. It's very easy to forget that when you're surrounded by people who are doing their PhDs and already have their PhDs or masters or whatever, and you can kind of lose perspective, but once you're out of it, the PhD and the masters are very valuable, and they're taken very seriously outside of it, and it does help your job prospects, so it's still worth doing. Another thing is that work politics exist everywhere you go. So I thought that there would be kind of no work politics in science, because we're all there for the same reason and doing research for the sake of doing research. But as you kind of get further into it, especially in a postdoc position, you'll find that people are people everywhere you go. It's all kind of about having relationships with people, and even if you have very different personalities, being able to work with other people is a kind of key skill that you're going to need whether you stay in academia or not. Along the same lines, you cannot avoid talking about money. So from what I've heard from non-academics who work at Nikon, scientists really, really hate talking about money. I think a lot of us are uncomfortable because, again, you're so used to doing research for the greater good. And then doing it for money feels weird. But in reality, even if you stay in academia, running a lab is not without its own kind of like financial issues. It ends up being a lot like running a small business. You need to pay attention to getting grants, being able to pay for reagents and the research space and paying people to work there. So you can't really avoid that, I find. It's also not a black and white choice to leave academia and go into industry. I think I felt like I was making this big monumental decision I could never come back from, but the truth is you can go back and forth if you need to, right? None of these decisions are permanent. It doesn't need to be that stressful. And a lot of roles that PhD holders end up doing in industry kind of bridge that gap. So even with my role, I'm still working with people to help them write grants for specific microscopes or instruments. I'm also involved in helping them write method sections for certain types of microscopy. You kind of end up doing both in a lot of cases. And again, if you leave and you don't like it, you can always go back. And finally, most scientists, myself included, who've left academia for industry just want to help you if you're interested in making that same jump. So it was a little bit tough. It's a big learning curve, all that kind of stuff. But every person that I reached out to asking for help or for advice or anything like that was wonderful and very happy to chat with me or meet with me for a coffee and tell me about their job and how they got there. I got lots of help with things like resume writing and putting together slides for certain interviews, all that kind of stuff. So most former academics know that it's a tough transition and are happy to help. Again, myself included, please feel free to reach out. And with that, thank you all for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Sarah. That was great. I really appreciate you sharing all the details, even from your pathway to the interview tips. I think that's very valuable as well. So what I'll do is stop recording.